Welcome to the SIE podcast. I'm going to be sharing with you a portion of many of the lessons that make up the full series of audio lessons of the new second edition of the Securities Industry Essentials Exam podcast, audio lessons for the SIE exam. The full series of audio lessons is about 36 hours and 53 minutes of audio instruction spread over about 67 lessons. The full series of audio lessons is available at the website siepodcast.com and has proven very effective in supplementing your study for the SIE exam. I always tell people it's not a substitute for your books. It's a supplement to your book learning. To pass this examination, which is fairly difficult, you need to master a broad category of financial subjects and rules and regulations. And to do that, I recommend you use the audio lessons to reinforce what you're learning with your books or whatever other study methods you use. This is a supplement, not a substitute for your book learning. All right, let's get on to our first sample lesson. Welcome to the Securities Industry Essentials Examination podcast, audio lessons for the SIE exam. And this is lesson number 2. And in this lesson, we're going to be talking about common stocks. This is really the first lesson that's actually dealing with the content of the material you're going to need to master in order to pass the Securities Industry's Essentials examination. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about common stock. Now, first of all, if you look at a company's balance sheet, there's going to be an asset, a liability, and an equity section. And the common stock side of the equation is in the equity section. Common stock is the equity of a company. If you're a common stockholder, you own a portion of the company. Common stock is issued by the corporation, and it's also issued by investment companies. When a company goes and does the charter for itself, it will register with the state. And in the state registration, in the articles of incorporation, it will state that the company is authorized to issue X number of shares. And then it'll usually state what the par value of those shares are. And it can be at par or a no-par stock. Typically, a company will have either a no-par stock, which means there is no intrinsic value to the stock, or a very low par value. And par value is simply the stated value of the company's stock on the company's balance sheet. For instance, let's say a company issues stock at $10 a share, yet the par value on the stock is $1. On the balance sheet, you will see issued stock at par at $1 and paid in excess of par value of $9. This is very common. The par value is set low primarily because of the different state regulations involving the taxation of corporations. Some states charge a tax based on the par value of the stock, and it really just depends on the state in what they can and cannot do. What state the company is chartered in depends what they can and can't do. So when you have a question, say, if you have a multiple choice question which asks, what would be one reason why you have a low par value on a stock? The answer to that would be because the taxation of the various states might tax the par value at a certain rate. And by lowering the par value, it reduces the tax to the corporation. Now, in the Articles of Incorporation, you will see authorized shares. When you look at a balance sheet, you will see issued shares. The issued shares is the number of authorized shares that have been sold. So a company may authorize 1,000 shares, but only issue 100 shares. And that means that other 900 shares are sitting there and they could be issued later to raise additional capital. So you'll have issued shares and authorized shares. Additionally, you will also have sometimes treasury shares, and treasury shares have been shares that have been authorized and issued and then bought back by the company. And they can use these shares for pension plan funding or stock option plan obligations, or they may choose to retire these shares at some point in time. When a company calculates its earnings per share, treasury stock shares are not taken into consideration when calculating earnings per share. Also, treasury stock does not have voting rights, and it does not receive dividends. Let's talk about the record keeping of stockholders. The corporation must keep records, very detailed records, of the number of shares outstanding and who owns those shares. Also, it must include the names and addresses of the owners of those shares, and that must be made available at the annual meeting for inspection. The reason the company has to have these registration documents is it's so that it knows where to send mail, such as the 10K, and we'll get into that later on, and the 10Qs, and the annual reports, and also the dividends that it may distribute. It has to have a detailed record. So you're taking the SIE exam for some reason. It may be just to learn about securities, and that's great. But most likely, you are considering entering the financial services industry. The SIE exam is a prerequisite or a co-requisite to taking the qualification examinations. And the qualification examinations are the ones that actually allow you to work in the financial services industry. Now, these qualification examinations require that you be sponsored by a broker-dealer. But taking the SIE exam does not require that. All it requires is that you're 18 years of age and that you pay the money to take the exam and that you take the exam. And once you pass the exam, it's good for 4 years. During that 4-year period of time, you can try to get a job with a broker-dealer and pass a true qualification exam. Now, there are 8 exams where the SIE exam is required as a prerequisite or a co-requisite. And these include the Series 6 exam, which is the investment company representative exam. And this allows you to basically sell investment company products. Usually this is required if you're going to work for an insurance company. And again, before an insurance company, you need to pass the insurance examination as well. Another exam, a qualification exam, probably the most popular exam, is the Series 7 exam, and that's called the General Securities Representative exam. And this is the exam that is required if you want to go to work as a stockbroker or a financial advisor for a broker-dealer. The next exam where the SIE is required is the Series 22, and this is the DPP representative exam. The DPP stands for Direct Participation Programs. In other words, limited partnerships would be a direct participation program. That's just an example. The Series 7 also requires the SIE exam, and that's the Securities Trader examination. And the Series 79, which is the Investment Banking Representative examination. And then the Series 82, which is the Private Securities Offering Representative examination. And then if you want to actually pass the Research Analyst examination, that requires not only the SIE exam, but also the Series 7, the Series 86, and the Series 87 examinations. And we're not going to go into those right now. And the last one, which requires the SIE examination, is the Series 99. So all of those examinations, those 8 examinations, require that you also pass the Securities Industries Essentials examination. So by passing the SIE exam, you are getting yourself way ahead of the game in trying to get a job for a broker-dealer. And that's why we offer a series of audio lessons for the SIE exam. We also offer audio lessons for the Series 6 exam, the Series 7 exam, the Series 22 exam. We're currently working on lessons for the Series 65 and 66, and we also have lessons for the Series 63 exam. So if you want to learn more about those audio lessons, which are currently available, You can go to any one of the websites, the SIE podcast website, the Series 7 podcast website, the Series 6 lessons.com website. Any of those websites will give you information on the other examinations as well, but provide more detailed information on the particular lesson that website is set up for. So congratulations and good luck on the SIE exam. The person that keeps the records for the corporation is called the registrar, and that's spelled registrar. Now, let's say you sell your stock to another person. When you sell that stock, the person that handles the transfer of your stock from your name to the other person's name is called the transfer agent. So the registrar watches the transfer agent to make sure he makes the transfer in the correct way. The transfer agent will cancel the old shares, which were in your name, and issue new shares in the name of the new purchaser. This is updated daily, and the new information of the address and the person of record is passed back to the registrar. The list of owners of the stock is called the record book of stockholders. Transfer agents can make mistakes from time to time. Now, over the last half century, they've gone from being actual physical securities to book entry certificates. And in this case, instead of physically issuing shares and then canceling them when they're bought and sold and reissuing new shares, the book entry certificate simply makes an entry of the transfer agent and by the clearing corporation that conducted the trade and that settles the trade. When you're asked, the registrar is always acting as the watchdog over the transfer agent. Okay, let's talk about the rights of the shareholder. The first and foremost right you need to understand as being a common stock shareholder is that your liability is limited to the value of your stock. In other words, you can't lose more money than you invested. You can lose all of that money, but your liability is limited to your investment. The second thing you need to understand is that common stockholders have the right to vote at the company's annual meeting, and they vote for the board of directors, who in turn will appoint the officers of the corporation. Two other things you will always see on the proxy statement. The first one is the reappointment of the auditor. You have a right to vote on the auditor that audits the books of the corporation. Now, I've never heard of an auditor being voted out of a corporation through the proxy process. And one other thing, to have a say on pay of the executive management of the company. And this is something that's caused a little bit of consternation in corporations because there has been a very big tendency to increase pay packages for executives. And it's come to light now, and now we're starting to see stockholders push back against what are considered fairly exorbitant pay packages. And in fact, in the last few years, there's been actual votes against the pay packages. Now, these are non-binding votes, but management must pay attention to what the wishes of the stockholders are. In my firm, just a little side note, I am responsible for voting the proxies of the holdings that our company has. We're a registered investment management firm, and I vote the proxies. And I will typically spend some time going through these and compare the growth in the revenues and the earnings of the corporation against the growth in the executive salaries. And quite often there's a big disconnect. You'll see that the company's growth has been marginal or flat or non-existent, yet I continue to see executive pay packages increase. And when I see this, I typically vote against the pay package, and quite often I may choose to vote against the entire board of directors for letting this behavior continue. Just a side note on that. Quite often on proxy statements, and this is the ballot basically that you will use to vote your choices, there will be other issues that may relate to the corporate business, such as the authorization to authorize more shares, or the changing of certain stockholder rights, such as preemptive rights, and we'll get into those a little later. but the amount of shares that you have is determined usually by the number of shares you own. If a company's issued 100 shares and you own 50 shares, you have 50% of the voting rights. Now, there's some other concepts we'll get into later on which talked about preemptive rights and other rights of stockholders that affect sometimes how you vote. Stockholder will often vote on whether to issue additional convertible bonds or preferred stocks. These will be all things that are voted on in stockholder meetings and also special meetings that are called by the board of directors. Some items that stockholder vote under the New York Stock Exchange rules include the declaration of a stock split, the issue of stock options to officers on a preferential basis, in other words, at a price lower than you and I get to buy in the open market, the issuance of convertible bonds, and also the declaration of a reverse stock split. A stock split is when you would multiply the number of shares by a certain factor. A typical stock split would be a 2-to-1 stock split, where once you had 1 share, after a stock split of a 2-to-1 stock split, you would have 2 shares. A reverse stock split is exactly the opposite. A 50% reverse stock split would say if you once had 2 shares, when they were done with the reverse stock split of 50%, you would now have 1 share. Some items don't require a stockholder vote according to the New York Stock Exchange rules, and these include the declaration of a dividend, the declaration of a stock dividend, and a stock dividend is instead of issuing you additional cash as a dividend, they issue you additional shares as a dividend. And this is different than a stock split, primarily because the number of shares they're issuing doesn't amount to what is considered a split. And also, it's not required that you have a stockholder vote to repurchase shares. These are decisions that are made by the board of directors. Now, the logic that the New York Stock Exchange uses in the requirement that a stockholder vote be used to, let's say, declare a reverse stock split or issue convertible bonds or preferred stock or issue stock options or declare a stock split is because they think that these actions could be, and quite often are, dilutive to the stockholders' interests. For instance, if the company issues convertible bonds or, let's say, preferred stock, it may be dilutive to your interests as a stockholder in the company. Thanks for listening to that lesson. Again, this is only a portion of this particular lesson, actually a very small portion. If you think my audio method of teaching is useful to you, please consider buying the full series of audio lessons available at the website siepodcast.com. Best of luck in your studies.